They ordered without eye contact, cream sugar, move on like she was just another face behind the counter. The morning rush at the base cafeteria was always hectic, with soldiers grabbing quick breakfast before heading to training or duty assignments. But when the new colonel glanced at her name badge, something made him pause mid-stride and stare. Maria Santos, the name was familiar, but he couldn't place where he had heard it before. He rushed to his office, pulled up her personnel record, and his hands began to shake. Because the woman serving coffee with a quiet smile and patient demeanor wasn't just any civilian employee working at the base commissary. She was someone who had once pulled 3 wounded soldiers from a burning Bradley fighting vehicle under heavy enemy fire in the mountains of Afghanistan. Someone whose courage under fire had earned her a Bronze Star with Valor device, and whose actions had saved lives when every second counted. And that morning, the entire base would finally learn who had been quietly serving their breakfast for the past 2 years. The colonel's discovery sent shockwaves through the chain of command as word spread that one of the most decorated female combat veterans of the Afghanistan War had been working anonymously in their midst. Maria Santos hadn't hidden her military service, but she had never advertised it, either choosing to let her work performance speak for itself rather than trading on her combat record for recognition or special treatment. But now her story was about to transform how everyone on the base understood service, sacrifice, and the quiet dignity of true heroism. The woman who had faced enemy fire without flinching continued serving coffee with the same steady hands that had once saved lives under combat conditions. She didn't need their recognition or their sudden attention because she had never been working for applause or acknowledgement. She had been serving in the way she knew best, providing for the daily needs of soldiers who reminded her of the young men and women she had fought alongside in the unforgiving terrain of a distant war. Welcome to Silent Salute. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being a part of it. Camp Pendleton stretched across the Southern California coastline like a sprawling military city, complete with training facilities, administrative buildings, and support services that sustained one of the largest Marine Corps installations in the United States. The base served as home to multiple units, including infantry battalions, logistics commands, and specialized training schools that prepared Marines for deployment to combat zones around the world. Within this vast complex, the main commissary served as a vital hub where military personnel and their families could access food services and basic necessities at reasonable prices. The cafeteria section of the commissary was particularly busy during morning hours when Marines and sailors grabbed quick breakfasts before reporting to their respective units for training exercises, formation meetings, and duty assignments that would occupy their days. Among the civilian employees working in the commissary cafeteria was a woman named Maria Santos who had been serving behind the counter for just over 2 years. At 34 years old, Maria appeared unremarkable in her standard food service uniform of white shirt and black pants, with her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that kept it away from the food preparation areas. She worked efficiently and professionally, maintaining the kind of quiet competence that made her popular with both customers and co-workers. Maria's routine was predictable and customer-focused, beginning each morning with preparation of coffee stations and breakfast items before transitioning to serving duties during the busy morning rush when hundreds of military personnel passed through the cafeteria seeking quick meals before starting their daily responsibilities. She knew many of the regular customers by sight and often remembered their preferences for coffee preparation and food selections. To the Marines and sailors who encountered Maria during their daily routines, she was simply a reliable fixture in their morning rituals, someone who ensured that coffee was fresh, food was hot, and service was efficient enough to accommodate their tight schedules. They appreciated her friendliness and professionalism, but most viewed her with the casual indifference that people often show towards service workers whose contributions they value but rarely think about deeply. The military personnel weren't intentionally dismissive or unkind, they simply operated within demanding schedules that left little time for extended conversation with civilian employees. Their focus was necessarily directed toward military duties, training requirements, and operational responsibilities that demanded their full attention and energy. Maria understood this dynamic and had never sought personal recognition or special attention from her customers. What none of the military personnel realized was that Maria's understanding of military culture, military values, and the stresses of military life came from far more than her civilian employment at Camp Pendleton. Her empathy for young Marines facing deployment, her understanding of military hierarchy, and her appreciation for the sacrifices that military service demanded weren't learned from employee training or casual observation. They came from her own distinguished combat service during some of the most intense fighting of the Afghanistan War. Maria Santos had enlisted in the Army in 2005 at the age of 21, driven by a combination of patriotic duty, family tradition, and personal determination to serve her country during a time of war. After completing basic training and advanced individual training as a combat medic, Maria had been assigned to the 4th Infantry Division and deployed to Afghanistan, where she would spend 3 tours of duty providing medical support to infantry units operating in some of the war's most dangerous regions. During her first deployment, Maria had served as a combat medic with a rifle company conducting operations in the mountains along the Pakistan border, where American forces engaged Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters in terrain that favored defenders and made medical evacuation extremely challenging. Her responsibilities had included not only treating wounded soldiers under fire, but also participating in combat operations as a fully qualified infantry soldier when tactical situations demanded. Maria's second deployment had been even more demanding, as she served with a forward operating base that conducted daily patrols and reconnaissance missions in areas where enemy contact was routine and casualties were frequent. Her medical skills had been tested repeatedly as she treated everything from gunshot wounds and shrapnel injuries to burns and traumatic amputations under conditions that would challenge even experienced trauma surgeons. The mission that had earned Maria the Bronze Star with Valor device had taken place during her third deployment, when her patrol had been ambushed while conducting a reconnaissance mission in a mountainous region known for heavy Taliban activity. During the firefight that followed, an improvised explosive device had detonated under their lead vehicle, causing the Bradley fighting vehicle to catch fire with 3 wounded soldiers trapped inside. Despite intense enemy fire from multiple positions, Maria had immediately moved toward the burning vehicle to provide medical assistance to the trapped soldiers. When she reached the Bradley, she discovered that the vehicle's exit doors had been damaged by the explosion, making it impossible for the wounded men to escape without assistance. Without hesitation, Maria had crawled into the burning vehicle, repeatedly entering and exiting to extract each of the wounded soldiers individually. Maria's actions during that engagement had taken place over several minutes, while enemy fighters maintained continuous fire on her position, and the burning vehicle threatened to explode from internal ammunition and fuel fires. She had successfully extracted all 3 wounded soldiers and provided immediate medical treatment that had stabilized their conditions until helicopter evacuation could be arranged. 2 of the men had suffered life-threatening injuries that would have been fatal without her immediate intervention. The citation for Maria's Bronze Star had specifically noted her exceptional courage under fire and her willingness to risk her own life repeatedly to save her fellow soldiers. The decoration had recognized not only her individual courage, but also her professional competence as a combat medic whose skills and dedication had made the difference between life and death for the men she had rescued. But Maria had completed her military service and transitioned to civilian life without fanfare or public recognition, choosing to process her war experiences privately rather than seeking attention or acknowledgement for her combat record. She understood that many veterans struggled with the transition to civilian employment, and she had consciously chosen to establish her civilian identity based on her current performance rather than her military background. This decision to maintain privacy about her military service had created an ironic situation where Maria worked daily among military personnel who shared her background and values, while remaining completely unaware of her own distinguished combat record. The Marines and sailors who ordered coffee from her each morning had no idea that the quiet woman serving their breakfast had faced combat situations that exceeded anything most of them would encounter during their own military careers. Maria's approach to her civilian work reflected the same attention to detail and commitment to service that had characterized her military career. She understood that providing reliable food service wasn't glamorous work, but it was essential to military readiness and morale. Service members needed to be able to count on quality meals and efficient service so they could focus on their military duties without worrying about basic needs. The irony of Maria's situation extended beyond her hidden military background to include her ongoing connection to the military community through her daily interactions with active duty personnel. She recognized the signs of stress and fatigue that indicated when service members were struggling with deployment preparations, family separations, or the general demands of military life. She often found subtle ways to provide extra kindness and support through friendly conversation and attentive service. On the morning when everything changed, Colonel James Mitchell was conducting his regular inspection tour of base facilities as part of his new responsibilities as commanding officer of the Logistics Command. Mitchell had recently transferred to Camp Pendleton after completing a deployment in Afghanistan where he had served as a brigade commander during some of the war's final major combat operations. Colonel Mitchell entered the commissary cafeteria during the busy morning rush, intending to observe operations and interact with both military customers and civilian employees as part of his ongoing assessment of base services and support functions. He had learned during his previous commands that the quality of support services directly affected military readiness and morale, making these inspections an important part of his leadership responsibilities. As Colonel Mitchell moved through the cafeteria line, he observed the efficient service and professional demeanor of the civilian employees who were handling the morning rush with obvious competence and experience. When he reached the coffee station, he was served by a woman whose name badge identified her as Maria Santos, a name that triggered a vague sense of recognition that he couldn't immediately place. Colonel Mitchell had an exceptional memory for names and faces developed through years of military service, where remembering personnel details was essential for effective leadership. The name Maria Santos seemed familiar in a way that suggested military rather than civilian context, but he couldn't recall where or when he might have encountered it. He accepted his coffee with a polite thank you and continued his inspection tour, but the nagging sense of recognition remained. Later that morning, Colonel Mitchell returned to his office and accessed the base personnel database to research the background of civilian employees he had encountered during his inspection. When he pulled up Maria Santos's personnel file, the information he discovered made him stop breathing for a moment as the pieces of recognition suddenly fell into place. Maria Santos wasn't just a name from some routine personnel roster or casual military encounter. She was the combat medic whose heroic actions had been briefed throughout the chain of command during his deployment in Afghanistan. Colonel Mitchell had been serving as a brigade commander in the same operational area where Maria's Bronze Star action had taken place, and he clearly remembered the after-action reports that had described her extraordinary courage under fire. The colonel's hands shook as he read through Maria's complete military record, discovering details that made her one of the most decorated female combat veterans of the Afghanistan War. In addition to the Bronze Star with Valor device, she had been awarded the Combat Medical Badge, the Purple Heart for wounds received in action, and multiple other decorations recognizing her combat service and medical expertise. Colonel Mitchell immediately understood the significance of what he had discovered and the implications for how Maria had been treated by military personnel who had no idea they were being served by a genuine war hero. He realized that Maria had been working at the base for over 2 years without anyone recognizing her distinguished military background or the extraordinary nature of her combat service. The colonel's first instinct was to immediately recognize Maria publicly and ensure that her military service received appropriate acknowledgement from the base community. But his military experience had taught him that combat veterans often had complex relationships with public recognition and that some preferred to keep their military service private for personal reasons that deserved respect. Colonel Mitchell decided to approach Maria privately to discuss her military background and determine how she wanted her service to be acknowledged, if at all. He understood that the decision about public recognition should be hers to make, and that his role was to ensure she received appropriate respect rather than unwanted attention that might make her uncomfortable. When Colonel Mitchell returned to the commissary later that afternoon, he asked to speak with Maria, privately explaining that he had discovered her military background and wanted to discuss it with her away from the busy cafeteria environment. Maria agreed to meet with him during her break, understanding that her military service had been discovered and that some form of official response was probably inevitable. The conversation that took place in Colonel Mitchell's office was emotional and revealing as Maria shared her perspective on her military service and her transition to civilian employment. She explained that she had deliberately kept her military background private not because she was ashamed of her service, but because she wanted to be evaluated based on her current performance rather than her past achievements. Maria described the challenges she had faced transitioning from combat operations to civilian employment, including dealing with post-traumatic stress symptoms that had made it difficult to maintain steady employment immediately after her discharge from the Army. She had found that the structured environment and clear expectations of food service work had provided stability and purpose during a difficult period of readjustment. Colonel Mitchell listened with obvious respect and understanding, recognizing that Maria's choice to work in food service represented not a step down from her military career, but a continuation of her commitment to serving others in whatever capacity circumstances allowed. He expressed his admiration for her service and his appreciation for her ongoing contribution to base operations and military morale. The colonel also shared his own memories of the reports he had received about Maria's Bronze Star action, explaining that her heroism had been recognized and discussed throughout the command structure even though she had never been aware of the broader impact of her actions. He described how her example had been used to illustrate the importance of medical training and the courage that combat medics displayed in serving their fellow soldiers. Maria's response to this information was characteristically modest, as she emphasized that she had simply done her job and that the soldiers she had rescued would have done the same for her if circumstances had been reversed. But Colonel Mitchell understood that her humility was precisely what made her heroism so remarkable and her ongoing service so valuable to the military community. The colonel asked Maria how she would prefer her military service to be acknowledged, understanding that different veterans had different comfort levels with public recognition. Maria admitted that while she didn't seek attention, she was proud of her service and wouldn't object to appropriate recognition that might help other veterans feel more comfortable about their own transitions to civilian employment. Colonel Mitchell proposed a plan that would recognize Maria's service while respecting her preferences for how that recognition should be conducted. He suggested organizing a small ceremony that would honor her military achievements while also highlighting the important contributions that veteran employees made to base operations and military readiness. Maria agreed to this plan, understanding that her recognition might encourage other veterans to share their own stories and seek employment opportunities that allowed them to continue serving their military communities. She recognized that her example could demonstrate that meaningful service took many forms and that combat veterans could contribute to military readiness in both military and civilian capacities. The ceremony that Colonel Mitchell organized took place the following week in the base conference center with attendance that included military leadership, civilian employees, and representatives from veteran organizations who wanted to honor Maria's service and support her ongoing contributions to the military community. Colonel Mitchell began the ceremony by reading Maria's military record and describing the specific actions that had earned her the Bronze Star with Valor device. He provided context about the tactical situation and the risks Maria had faced while rescuing her fellow soldiers, emphasizing that her courage had been displayed repeatedly over multiple deployments rather than in a single moment of crisis. The colonel also described Maria's ongoing service at Camp Pendleton, highlighting how her daily interactions with military personnel demonstrated the same commitment to service and attention to detail that had characterized her military career. He emphasized that her work in the commissary represented not a lesser form of service, but a continuation of her dedication to supporting military readiness and morale. Maria was invited to speak about her experience and her perspective on service, both military and civilian. She addressed the audience with the same quiet confidence that had characterized her combat service, describing how her military experience had taught her that meaningful contribution could take many forms and that serving others was a privilege regardless of the specific context or recognition involved. The ceremony concluded with presentations from various military and civilian organizations recognizing Maria's service and her ongoing contributions to the base community. But the most meaningful moment came when several young Marines and sailors who had been served by Maria in the commissary approached her personally to thank her for her service and to express their newfound appreciation for her daily contributions to their military experience. The impact of Maria's recognition extended far beyond the immediate ceremony, as her story spread throughout the base community and beyond through social media and military networks that connected active duty personnel with veteran communities. Her example resonated with service members and veterans who recognized the value of continuing to serve in whatever capacity circumstances allowed. Maria's story also highlighted broader issues within military culture regarding the recognition and integration of veteran employees whose experience and dedication could contribute significantly to military readiness and effectiveness. Base leadership began implementing policies to better identify and acknowledge veteran employees whose backgrounds and skills represented valuable resources for training, mentorship, and operational support. The revelation of Maria's background led to immediate changes in how she was perceived and treated by military personnel throughout the base. Service members who had previously viewed her as just another civilian employee began seeking opportunities to learn from her experience, while recognizing that her presence represented a connection to recent combat operations and lessons learned from actual battlefield conditions. But perhaps the most important impact was on other veteran employees who had been working quietly at various base facilities without recognition or acknowledgement of their military service. Maria's example encouraged them to share their own stories and seek opportunities to contribute their experience and expertise to military training and readiness efforts. Maria Santos continued working in the commissary after her recognition, but found herself in the additional role of informal mentor and advisor to military personnel who wanted to learn from her combat experience and her perspective on military service. She handled this expanded responsibility with characteristic professionalism, maintaining her regular work duties while making herself available to share her knowledge with service members who could benefit from her insights. The Colonel's discovery of Maria's background had revealed not just an individual story of hidden heroism, but a broader reminder that extraordinary people often work quietly among us, without seeking recognition or acknowledgement for their past achievements or ongoing contributions. Maria's Bronze Star represented not just her own courage and sacrifice, but the dedication of thousands of other veterans who continued to serve their communities in countless, unrecognized ways. Sometimes the most remarkable people are hiding in the most ordinary places, serving others with the same dedication and excellence that once earned them recognition on distant battlefields. Maria Santos had spent 2 years serving coffee at Camp Pendleton with the same steady hands that had once pulled wounded soldiers from burning vehicles, but had never sought to trade on her combat record for special treatment or attention. The lesson learned from Maria's story was about the importance of recognizing that everyone has a history and experiences that extend far beyond their current role or position. The young Marines and sailors who had been ordering coffee from her each morning learned to see beyond surface appearances, to appreciate the depth of experience and sacrifice that surrounded them in unexpected places. In the end, Maria Santos didn't need recognition or special treatment to validate her service, because she had always known that her contributions mattered regardless of whether others acknowledged them. But the recognition meant something to the younger generation of service members who learned about courage and sacrifice through her example and who gained new appreciation for the veterans who continued to serve in their communities. This story was brought to you by Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question: have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Tell us in the comments what they meant to you and how you remember them. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.